Time for a mostly thorough Blender review. The software I'm using is called Blender. You can find it at blender.com.
And in case you're wondering, yes, it is free and open source. The price tag is exactly $0 and 0 cents plus tax. You don't have to install Blender. Even though it can detect what kind of system you're using, you can use different types of files instead. For instance, a portable zip file for Windows. That way, in case you're worried about it, it does not integrate into your system. The version I'm using is 3.3.1. At the time of recording, they are actively working on a 3.4 while teasing a 3.5. When you start up Blender for the first time, your splash screen is going to ask you a few questions. Specifically, your choice of selection with the mouse button, what your spacebar does, and what the right mouse button does. Alternatively, if you start up a newer version of Blender than the one you were using before, you will also be given the option to import the settings from the previous version. To date myself, I found out about Blender when it was 2.49. I've been using it since it was 2.5x. That means I am used to right-click select. I didn't dare to change anything, rather stick with the steep learning curve because it also helped when looking for answers in the Blender manual and watching video tutorials. Make no mistake, that is no excuse for you to do the same. Blender has given us plenty of options since 2.8x. Granted, some of them were there beforehand, but beginning at the exact introduction of 2.8x, they have made some of these options far more apparent, added in some new ones, and both of those groups infinitely easier to find. For instance, you can choose presets. There's Blender, Blender 2.7x, and Industry Standard. 2.7x meaning right-click select, as in how it was before 2.8x. There is also the Industry Standard, which is useful if you're coming in from other types of 3D modeling software, like Maya and 3ds Max. So, hear me when I say, do not use right-click select. You will make your life infinitely more difficult than it needs to be. Use left-click select. The only reason I am still using right-click select is because I've been using it since a very early time. And so, while switching over to what everyone else does is definitely possible, minus how uncomfortable it would be, among personal reasons, it would simply be an utter waste of time when I can move around just as fast with the controls I'm used to. Do not use right-click select. Do not. Instead, listen to the control conversion. My right-click is your left-click. My left-click, which moves the 3D cursor, is your Alt plus left-click. My W, which opens context menus, is your right-click. I use F3 to open the search function. From there, I can type in what operation I want to perform, and also learn its location and key bindings for future reference. The same thing can be done in the key map section of Blender's preferences. After setting your controls to the splash screen, it will never ask again. Instead, it will just ask you what kind of files you want to open, and any files you may have recently opened. If you want to bring back the splash screen, press the Blender icon next to the File button, and choose it from the drop-down menu. If you want the first time setup to appear, well, by all means, try to find out. If it doesn't involve a fresh installation of Blender, or otherwise ruining your system, just let me know. Plenty of add-ons come packaged with Blender. Screencast Keys is not one of them. To install an add-on like Screencast Keys, which does exactly what it says on the label by the way, go to the site and download the zip folder from it. Then go to Blender Preferences, choose Add-ons, and then choose Install. Select the zip folder you just downloaded, that is, do not unzip anything from it. Choose the zip folder exactly as is, and choose Install. Blender will freeze. That's okay, that just means it's working. When it finishes installing, it will unfreeze. From there, it will automatically jump you over to the add-on, where all you have to do is click. There's this button with 3 lines at the bottom left-hand corner of the Preferences window. When you click it, you'll get a few options. One of them is to save your preferences, though if you open it, you find it might not really be needed when autosave is enabled. For an add-on like Screencast Keys, you will find it in the End Properties panel. N is for the right-hand panel in the 3D viewport, T is for the left. When you press N, the one on the right-hand side should open. You should see a few tabs. One of them should read Screencast Keys. If you click it, you see a checkmark next to the name of the add-on, Screencast Keys. Click the checkbox to enable it. Click the arrow to open a drop-down, where you'll get a whole bunch of options you can use to customize it. Each object has a set of interaction modes. For mesh objects, it's 6, and there's a drop-down menu on the top left-hand corner of the screen. But of course you want to know what the shortcut is, so I'm going to tell you. It's Control-Tab, and this applies to every object. When your mouse is inside the circle, whether you click to confirm or deny, the pie menu will go away and nothing will happen. When your mouse cursor is outside the circle, whatever is most in the direction towards, as indicated by the circle itself, is what mode you will enter when you click to confirm. For armatures, the case is completely different. From object mode, pressing Control Tab will send you into pose mode, but pressing Tab alone will send you into edit mode. From pose mode, Tab will send you to edit mode, and Control Tab will send you to object mode. In edit mode, Control Tab is the only instance where the pie menu will show up. There is a snapping function with a whole bunch of options, and though you have to open the drop-down menu to specify those options, its toggle shortcut is Shift-Tab. The basic controls for transforming objects are G, R, and S. G is to move, though obviously it means grab. R is to rotate, and S is to scale. You can even constrain axes. Pressing either X, Y, or Z will constrain the transformations to those axes. Pressing Shift plus an axis will ignore that axis. So for instance, if I press Shift X, I will transform on only the Y and Z axes. To escape the constraints without aborting the operation, try to constrain or ignore the axis again. That way you'll cycle back to free transform. Rotate is special because if you press R twice, then regardless of axis constraints, you will cycle the rotation into a trackball mode. One more thing I need to mention, while COM is the pie menu for object orientations, period is a pie menu for object pivot points. For orientations, when you transform objects, by default it's set to global. So when you press G, R, or S, the first time is a free transform. When you constrain it, the axes are based on the orientation you chose. When you try to constrain it the exact same way again, it'll jump to another based on which one you chose. If global was first, it goes to local. If it's any but global, it goes to global. And when you try to constrain it the same way once again, it cycles back to free transform again. The pivot point just changes the center from which it transforms. So if it's a 3D cursor, then that will be the center of the transformations. And since world origin isn't an option, the only way to get it is by putting the 3D cursor there. So remember, COM is a pie menu for object transformation orientations. Period. On the main keyboard, which I should have said the first time, is the pie menu for the pivot points. Your view has constraints too. Its shortcut is the tilde button. On keyboards I'm aware of, on the main keyboard, you will find this below the escape key, above the tab key, and left of the 1 key. But the pie menu doesn't do it alone. Your numpad, regardless of number lock enabled, does everything the pie menu offers. Pressing 1, 3, or 7 will, in that order, align your view to either the front, the right hand side, or the top of whatever you're looking at, regardless of the rotation point. It only cares about the center of your view at the time. If you hold Control while pressing 1, 3, or 7, you will get the opposite views instead. That is, in order, back, left hand side, and bottom. Pressing 5 on the numpad will toggle between perspective and orthographic projections. Pressing 4 or 6 will rotate your view by 15-degree increments, regardless of wherever you're looking from. And 0 will snap your view to the camera. And yes, there's an opposite. It's called Control-Alt-0. P.S. Camera's perspective only. So even if you are an orthographic, you will always see your camera through a perspective projection. There's this gizmo on the top right-hand corner of your view. That is yet another way of moving your camera. No matter if you hold Control, Shift, or Alt, the large gizmo axes will only rotate the view. And the 4 buttons beneath it will, in order, zoom, pan, jump to camera, and change the projection. You could also use the middle mouse button to do this. Middle mouse button alone will rotate the view. Shift middle mouse is pan, Control middle mouse or scroll middle mouse is zoom, and Alt middle mouse will snap your view to specific alignments the same way the numpad does. Specifically, the 1, 3, and 7 views. But it's not just holding Alt middle mouse and dragging. Specifically, when you Alt middle mouse either up, down, left, or right, it'll rotate your view by 90-degree increments. And in the case you would go upside down, it will instead just flip you right side up. So for instance, if I try to Alt middle mouse my way from right to left, when I make my way to top and go to right, I would be upside down. Except not really, because it would automatically turn me right side up as I go left. You can get rid of these gizmos by pressing Control tilde, and it is that same drop-down menu that you will find the object transformation gizmos. If you press Shift tilde, you will enter View Flight Mode. And because I'm not going to read you all the controls, I will say that when active, all the controls can be seen at the bottom of the window. There are viewport shading options. Those buttons are also found in the top right hand corner of the viewport window. But of course you came here to learn about the shortcuts. Z alone is the shading pie menu. Alt-Z is X-ray mode. Shift-Alt-Z toggles the overlays. And Shift-Z jumps you to wireframe mode with X-rays turned on, regardless of which mode you were in, and regardless of where you had X-rays turned on before. Though here you can disable X-rays. And if you're in wireframe mode when you press Shift-Z, it will just send you back to whatever mode you were in before. In edit mode, for meshes, there are 3 types of selection modes. even though the buttons are on the top left-hand corner of the viewport during edit mode. 1 is for vertex, 2 is for edge, and 3 is for face. In object mode and edit mode, M has 2 different purposes. In object mode, provided you have objects selected, pressing M will allow you to move those objects between collections, and choose to move to a new one and name it. In edit mode, with any amount of vertices, edges, or faces selected, you just get the merge context menu. I'm sure you remember your friend Control J. It's when you have 2 vertices across the same base that aren't connected together, and so in the process of trying to turn it and got into a quad or a bunch of quads, you would just press Control J to put an edge between them, thereby joining them. And I'm sure you also remember they could spawn vertices out of nowhere. In vertex mode, with nothing selected, you can control click to spawn a vertex out of nowhere. And you could keep doing this to make a line of edges, but I'm not sure that I explained that the same thing also applies to edges and faces. That is, when you have any amount of edges or faces selected, if you click away from them, you extrude in the direction you clicked. Just that the only problem with this is, the edges and faces in question would turn the face's direction of the extrusion. And so having to turn those previous edges and faces back, this was somewhere between an inconvenience and a hindrance in an attempt to model a car. I'm sure you remember your friend Alt S from a biped addendum. Its name is Shrink and Fatten. Just don't confuse him for his twin brother S for Scale. Control D is for Duplicate. It works in both object mode and edit mode, and it works with multiple separate selections. I'm sure you remember your friend Mr. L. In edit mode, L is for linked. If your mouse cursor is between multiple objects, L won't do anything for you. That is, you need to be close enough to one in order for him to decide what you're trying to select. I'm sure you remember Alt click. Originally designed to select edge rings, if you have your cursor near an edge, then hold Alt while trying to select it. You could also select edge lines. And I'm sure you remember this because we use this in an attempt to model a vehicle. Mr. H, on the other hand, is kinda shy. H is for hide. Alt H does the opposite. But unlike Control Z, it doesn't remember what you hid in what order. It remembers everything you hid up to that point. Remember how materials work? When an object has only one material, the entire object takes that material. But if an object has multiple material slots, you can assign different materials to different faces. If you right-click between 2 views in the window, well, at least in my case, you can choose to merge or split the windows and in which direction. You can apply images as materials, but when you do this, they might not look correct. So now you gotta U for UV unwrap the faces in question. Then you have to open the UV editor. And with the faces selected in the 3D viewport, you can transform the faces in question until the images look exactly the way you want it to. Now, about principle BSDF, all those values determine how your object looks. But you can also add grayscale maps, known as texture maps, as non-colored data, to decide how you want material, or in this case, image/texture, to look in some places, but not others. A value of 1 means 100%. That means the greatest amount. So in the case of roughness, 1.0 or 100% means completely rough. No shine, no gloss. Whereas a value of 0 means the complete opposite. So in the case of roughness, 0 will be completely glossy. And colors are read this way for the same purpose. White is 100%, while black is 0%. The only things this don't apply to are normal maps. Why? Because they're colored differently. They do in fact use color data, just in a different way. Time for modifiers, starting with the mirror modifier. And because I forgot to say it earlier, I'm going to say it right now. There's an orange dot in the center of every object, or at least that's where they start. That would be the object's origin point, which you can move. In object mode, when you transform an object, the origin point transforms with it. In edit mode, the origin point stays put. So if for whatever reason the origin point isn't where you want it to be, select the object in question, open the context menu, again that's W for me and right click for you, and tell it to set the origin where you want to be. Oftentimes, that's the center of the object by mass. Alright, let's try this again. Modifiers. And the first one is mirror modifier. For this case, it starts off in the x-axis. That is, in edit mode, when you select everything and move across the x-line, its x-line, not the global x-line, the object's normal x-line, you will see a doppelganger moving the opposite direction, that is, across its y-line. If you don't want objects crossing over to the other side, you can enable clipping. Vertices that touch during transforms with clipping enabled will stick together when the operation is complete. That is, when you try to pull them away again, they will be treated as merged. If I were you, when you apply the mirror modifier, just end by distance. Just to be safe. If the transformation doesn't look correct, go into object mode and apply the rotation. Or whatever transformations may apply to this. You may be wondering what deltas are, but instead of telling you what they are, I'm just going to tell you to stay away from them for the time being, and web search them in your free time. I'm sure you remember your friends Edge Crease and Mark as Sharp. In edit mode, Shift E is for Edge Crease, and Control E is where you'll find Mark as Sharp. For anyone wondering, or guessing from hearing that, Control V is for Vertex, Control E is very much for Edge, and Control F is for Face. The Control E context menu is where you find both your old friends Edge Crease and Mark as Sharp. The only difference being Edge Crease having a cell phone, he's the only one out of the two immediately available on speed dial. But you can change this. If you've ever pressed Q, you may notice that a menu called Quick Favorites shows up, but nothing's in there. For any operation in particular, if either of us right-click it, we will be given the option to add to Quick Favorites. That way, next time we press Q, it'll be right there. Still doesn't put Mark as Sharp on speed dial, but at least now you'll be able to find him in the fastest menu in the application. For hard surface modeling purposes, or when you have a subsurface modifier with Catmull Clark going on, Edge Crease fights it back. And you can also find him in the End Properties panel under Item. He also works for lone and separate vertices. The most visible use for Mark as Sharp is for a modifier like Edge Split. In order for Edge Split to work, you need actual geometry. That is, you need quads, not n-gons. As you had seen in the previous video cut, I tried. But I didn't realize before looking back through a few videos. The face or faces in question must be inset and part of another face, all of whose vertices are connected to other vertices. Otherwise it won't work, even when you do call Mark as Sharp. Subsurf modifier does two things. It doubles the amount of vertices, and in the case of Catmull Clark, smooths the object. If you just want double the amount of vertices, choose simple. If you want to be destructive about it, then in edit mode, select the geometry in question, and right click, or press W in my case, and choose subdivide. Armatures need geometry to work with. The less geometry, the less the object's going to deform. Shift A is where the armature menu is found, and I just extrude a few bones in edit mode. Remember, to rig an object, select the object first, shift select the armature, then press Ctrl P to get the menu. Oftentimes, all you need are automatic weights. Weight painting is a thing. In the edit drop-down menu, which you can't pipe menu your way into by the way, look for lock interaction modes. It should have a checkbox with a check in it. Select it, then enter the menu again to make sure the check is gone. For meshes rigged to an armature, select the armature first, then go into pose mode, then shift select the mesh, or to make life easier, select the name of the mesh in the scene collection view, then choose weight paint mode. From there, for each bone you select, you'll most likely see colors emanating from them. On the rainbow, red is 100%, and blue is 0%, most likely because, only finding out when you select the bone for yourself, some bones are told not to deform anything at all, and this was done in advance for a good reason. Remember the teeth and tongue? The armature had bones for those purposes, and so I could first select the object in object mode, shift select the armature and go to pose mode, select the bone that mattered, press Ctrl P, and choose bone. For the case of the tongue, this worked too, except it was deforming parts of the biped, so I had to use weight paint mode to go inside, turn the default tool, draw, all the way down to 0, so that I would paint things blue for 0%, then select the bone that was deforming things, and paint everything that was deforming straight up blue. It took a while, but I did it. And the eyes also had their own bones. But when I paired them, I noticed and was reminded of something. It's not about fitting the bone into the eye, it was instead about making sure the tail end of the bone was at the center of the eye, not the entire bone or as much as possible. And then there were bone hierarchies, where bones had children who were also parents. And I used this fact to duplicate the eye bones, rename them, rotate them a little, and then pair the matching eyelid bones to them. But in the naming process, I had to end their names with either .L or .R. This was because of how Blender works. When mirroring or selecting mirrored, bones of the exact same name, but with .il or .r at the ends of their names, are the only bones that would be inversely selected this way. And in case anyone cares, _L and _R also work the same way. Just that whichever you choose, you better stick with it for the entire armature.